That's awesome.
That's really cool.
I guess I'm hanging out at the wrong bus stop.
I
I would say so.
No one has said that about me.
Would you say that like being an animator has kind of like ruined the illusion of animation for you in any way? Are you desensitized to any of it? Do you notice like flaws more?
Not me, because I never really, I'm not trying to sell myself short, but I never really got that good at animating, honestly. The Simpsons is a very specific breed of animation where it's sitcom animation. So one of the reasons actually I think I never got fired from the job was, even though I didn't have like a history with animation, or I wasn't trained in animation, I watched the show enough so I understood that like sort of the zany Saturday morning cartoon acting wouldn't fly on The Simpsons. It was more subtle. So I never really had to learn how to do much more beyond just acting, animating, if that makes sense. So when I see a movie like, like any Miyazaki movie, for instance, like, there's no way I'd ever be able to do that, like, animate that way. I mean, that's it. It almost like, because I've learned just enough that I understand how hard it is to do it well, it's almost had the opposite effect where I'm like, that is amazing. And then I also don't really have any knowledge of computer animation, so it blows my mind when I watch, like a movie, any movie now, where it's like, I don't know how they did that.
I was actually just going to ask, so during your entire time on the show, they were still doing hand-drawn cell animation? So
I'd say the first couple years they did, and then they made the switch right around the time that we were working on the movie, and that's when most of the light tables got moved out, and the Cintiq tablets got moved in. And the Cintiq is just basically like a Wacom tablet that has a monitor that you draw directly on. So I had never, I'd never really done any sort of computer animation. I'd never opened Photoshop before, so I kind of had to learn on the job. A lot of people did too, because again, this was season 16 or 17, and there are people who had been there since season 1 who were like, I don't want to work on a computer. I don't know why this is crazy. But eventually everyone was able to make the transition. But the way it's done now, it's still hand drawn. It's just hand drawn into a computer program.
Oh.
So it's not like, say, I think, for instance, South Park is done in Maya. It's not like that sort of a computer program. It's still hand drawn. It's just they aren't flipping papers.
What's the actual like production schedule for an episode? Doesn't it take like a long time?
I think it's 9 months, start to finish.
For one episode?
Oh yeah.
What?
Which is why like they have to sort of. I didn't actually watch the Apu episode, but I think that I kind of got the sense that they had to sort of like address that quickly. And when they do have to address something like that, they do have to do it quickly, because it's like they've been doing this, other episode that had been in the works since day one, 9 months, and then it's like, oh, we have to kind of scramble.
Yeah.
So there's a whole retakes department who handles that sort of thing.
Having said that, one of the most recent episodes is a parody of La La Land. I'm like, that would have been more topical a year ago.
Well, I mean, I was just surprised that it takes so long, because, granted, South Park is a lot more basic in a lot of ways, but still, they whip it together like in days.
I think their schedule is something like, I don't know for sure. I do remember I have a friend who worked there, and I remember her saying that she was 3 weeks on, 3 weeks off, so it was like she'd work for 3 weeks straight, and then have 3 weeks off and work. So I think it's a really, really short schedule on South Park.
I think they go from like writing to air in like 6 days.
Yeah, and that's why it's like so fresh. And
Sometimes
so
they pop those jokes that are really hot, like within a day or two.
Oh,
but
yeah.
I think they probably get away with, because the characters aren't as refined in how they speak, so you can get away with faking the mouth and all that stuff. Not as
probably true.
Tight, yeah.
Probably true.
Yeah, I mean, again, since The Simpsons, people are actually like drawing every single pose, and again, I don't really understand how computer animation works, but I do know that like in a program like Maya, there's like a model, and you kind of make that animate, and so it's not like you're actually physically drawing every single pose, which takes time.
So then, one thing also, that seems like an obvious question is, when they've done 636 episodes, how do they keep it fresh? I mean, like, I just don't see it. Do you have any idea, like, is it just
usually
they
you
hire
put
new
a wet paper towel in the bag with it
seal
before
it
you
right
put
in
it
there.
in the fridge. Yeah.
Do they hire new writers every year or two, or have some people been there forever as a writer?
There's definitely a turnover of writers, so they do have newer people coming in and moving out. I think that's a big part of it. I think that is more so the case than in the actual studio, because again, there are people who have been drawing who have been there since season 1. I think I think it's more important. Well, I don't want to minimize the artist work because artists do, a lot of really amazing work. But I think the writers are really at the start of the new ideas, and they're the ones that kind of keep the show feeling fresh, or trying to keep it feeling fresh.
Now, you might not know the answer to this, but is there somebody in charge of continuity for all that, so they don't repeat a joke or like an entire plot just kind of on accident?
Jeez.
That's a good question. Probably.
Yeah.
I know. Again, I think on our end there are whole books. Well, they're not books anymore. When I started, they were books. Now they're probably computer files on a computer of models. So all of Springfield, the houses, the yard, every angle, all the characters, all the props, all of those things, and you have to be able to, draw. Everyone has to draw that similarly enough that nothing stands out.
Yeah.
But an interesting thing that I noticed when I was there after a couple years is I would, scenes would come across my desk if I was doing like a retake, for instance, and I had to fix something or tweak something, and I'd open up the folder and immediately be like, oh, that's so and so's drawing. Mm-hmm. That's so and so's drawing.
Cool.
That's so and so's drawing, because you just could tell the subtle nuances between the different artists in the studio, and you could actually see you got to know what everyone's drawings looked like. So that was kind of cool.
Do you want to tell us the real quick anecdote of how you came to work on the movie?
Oh, sure. So, I think I had been there about 2 years. Rumors circulated a bit, and I actually had heard after the fact that I was about to get laid off because they were about to do a big overhaul on the show, and I was one of the new people, and they were just going to lay off some new people. Fortunately, nature called, and literally, and I was actually on my way, walking to the bathroom at the studio, and David Silverman and Richard Rainis. David is a producer and was a showrunner for a long time, and Richard was a producer. Stopped me and pointed at me, and they're like, "Hey, you, come over here." And I walked over. I'm like, "Yes." And they said, "Do you know how to use a Cintiq?" And I was like, "Not really." And they're like, "Do you know how to use Photoshop?" And I was like, "Not really." And they're like, "Think you can figure it out?" And I was like, "Probably." And
Just
they're like,
say yes, Liz.
"Yeah." I'm like, "Sure." They're like, "All right, you're coming to Fox."
Wow.
And so I, fortunately, because I happened to pass by them in the hallway that day, I ended up getting sent over to work on the movie with about, I think it was like 8 other artists. It was a very small crew. And Richard Sakai, who was the president of Gracie Films. And so it was just a really, really exciting experience. And I was there for, I think, a year and a half working on the movie at that point. And I was very, very lucky that I got to do that.
And the best part of that experience.
Oh, right.
Was...
So yeah, right. I keep forgetting about my husband, who I met on the actually met at the trailer, working on the movie. So it was good for a lot of reasons, a lot of different reasons. Yeah.
Did your husband worked on the show as well, or what?
So yeah, he worked on the show before I started on the show, and then this is actually kind of interesting too. He left right as I started, and I actually ended up taking his cubicle before I had ever met him. He left to work on, I think, Futurama. So he's worked on a lot of different things. And then we ended up meeting because they called him back to work on the movie, and so we ended up meeting to the trailer.
So, any ideas why Futurama was such a failure with only lasting, 12 seasons? It's just amazing. How do they do this? I mean, all the Fox shows that are cartoons, it's like, it's weird because they're never top 10 anymore, but they just keep going and going and going. It's like, do you know what's the deal with that? Like, Fox is thinking, is it cheaper to do than actor shows, or?
I don't actually know. I actually heard a rumor once that it would be cheaper to just do reruns of The Simpsons than it would, because the actors get paid really well.
Oh yeah.
But I think everyone involved wants to see it keep going. Like I think the voice actors really want to see it keep going. I mean, there's a lot of sort of feelings invested in the show, I think, and just sort of a lot of everyone that's working on it, I think, has a lot of.
Propriety.
They're connected to the show, and I don't think anyone's quite ready to let it go yet.
Yeah.
What's Rupert Murdoch like, really?
I didn't really bump arms with him at the water cooler.
Okay.
I have a feeling that Grandpa Simpson is designed after Rupert Murdoch.
I don't know about that, but that's a good.
They do look alike.
Do you have any good anecdotes from like behind the scenes? Any awful things happening?
Well, this is kind of one of my favorite stories. When I was working on The Simpsons, when I was working on The Simpsons movie, we all had to sign an NDA, so non-disclosure. We couldn't talk about the movie at all. It was very, very top secret, under wraps. So I'd say there were about 10 of us working in the trailer at the time, which, by the way, if you look at the credits of the movie, it says stacked animation crew. And that is because we all worked in, I don't know if you remember the short-lived Pamela Anderson show, Stacked.
Oh, yeah.
That was the trailer. We took over that trailer. So they called us the Stacked Animation Crew.
Wow.
I know. Anyway, that's a little aside. So when I was working on the Stacked Animation Crew, we weren't allowed to bring any friends or family in because it was this top secret operation. So we were all coming back from lunch. I was the first person back in the trailer, and I noticed a woman in front of my desk looking at my computer, and I panicked because I didn't recognize her. I was like, "Oh no, this person shouldn't be in here. Someone's family member wandered in. Oh, what do I do?" So I start talking to her. I'm just like, "Oh, excuse me, ma'am." And there's a drawing of Marge that I had just done on the screen, and she's like, "So, did you do that drawing?" And I'm like, "Oh, that's Julie Kavner."
Oh, my God.
She's absolutely allowed to be in here. And I got super starstruck, and she was just I remember her being so just interested in, the process and being like, "Oh, that's really cool. Like, did you draw that? Like, tell me, how does this work?" And I just thought that was awesome because, she'd been doing this for so long, and she was still so just interested in what the artists were doing, and that was nice.
That's great.
Yeah.
So then, did you ever have any experiences with any of the multitude of guest stars? I'm sounding like Julie Kavner right now myself, actually. I'm a little hoarse today.
Yeah, drink a little water there, Carl.
Actually, I do remember the Flight of the Conchords episode. I was the only person, I think, at the time in the studio who watched the show because I was really, really into the show. And word had gotten back to the director, Mark Kirkland, that I had, I liked the show and I understood the show. And so he called me to his office and he was like, "Hey, can you help me out? Or, if I'm going to give you some scenes with these characters, or if you have any sort of input about how these characters should act, Brett and Jermaine, because, we've only watched a couple episodes and it seems like you really like it." So at the premiere, Britt McKenzie was actually there, and I'm sure my friend Nikki grabbing me by the arm, and she's like, "You're coming with me," and she ran over and pushed me into him basically, and she's like, "This is my friend Liz. She's a really big fan," and I was really embarrassed, and I think I had food all over my hands, and I was like, reached my hand out to shake his, and I said, "Hi, I'm Liz. I have a bunch of food on my hand," and he was so nice, and
which is a typical New Zealand greeting.
It really is. I had
well.
Luckily I knew that, and so I knew he'd understand.
It's customary over there.
Well, is there any legendary stories, whether you met them or not, or whether you just heard about it, since you did note to us before the show that now that you don't work there, you can share anything. So, at Saturday Night Live, there's notorious, Steven Seagal's banned for life from the show because he's such an asshole. Yeah. So then what about The Simpsons? Is there anybody that was a nightmare?
Open the vault, Liz. Really dish.
Come on.
Oh,
Come on.
Man. They don't tell the artists very much.
Just one day you notice you're not drawing Poochie as much.
I know. I know. Where'd Poochie go?
Back to his home planet. Come on. Keep up.
They
Keep
tied up that
Liz.
loose end.
Oh man, I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but if I can think of something, I'll definitely.
Well, while you're thinking of that, on a similar note, but other end of the spectrum, who was your favorite guest star to draw?
Ooh. Well, okay. I forgot about this. There was a character Natalie Portman played that was Bart's girlfriend, and this is so narcissistic that this was my favorite character to draw, but she was actually modeled after me slightly. So the director, Raymond Percy, who also, fun fact, is the voice of Flash the Sloth in Zootopia. Yeah. So he was my first director on the show, and he
hopefully spoke faster than he did in...
He did, yeah, it's opposite. It's just sped up, 2 times. But that would have been a long meetings. I'd get out at 2 a.m. But they needed
Notes.
yeah. So this drawing, they needed to design Natalie Portman's character, and he, according to him, he sort of guided the people that did the models, the designers. He kept saying no, more like Liz, but. Just, to keep me grounded, it was because I have a really big head. And he was like, "No, that one girl, Liz, she's large. Yeah, she's got a big head and big hair. She'll fit right in with the cast because she'll match right up with."
You do have sort of a jaundiced yellow glow to your skin.
I do.
As well.
That helps. Yeah, I know you guys can't see me, but yeah, I'm bright yellow. I'm canary yellow.
I can see it.
So yeah, that was fun because it was very it was a little it was exciting.
By the way, we'll be using this episode to raise money to get Liz a new liver. So
dig deep, people.
fingers crossed.